Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone, and in particular to the colleagues from the Contact Point. I'll try to share my screen now so everyone can see my presentation. Yeah, I think it's wonderful that we are having this opportunity to discuss the issues. We had yesterday the Centre had co-organized a table on very related issues like digital infrastructures and colonial collections in all sorts of institutions in Germany and abroad. And I think, and I believe that we can bring some of the points and conclusions that we had yesterday to the table today as well. And I call upon colleagues in the chat to also comment and bring up questions that we discussed yesterday. And I've already seen some of the points being brought up in the chat. So the Department 5, that's an internal kind of category, the Department Cultural Goods and Collections from Colonial Contexts at the German Lost Art Foundation, who we are and what we do. Claudia Rose introduced the framework principles this morning, and there were these 6 areas of activity, and the second area was called Provenance Research, and that's exactly the activity that we've been tasked with. So our core business is funding and fostering post-colonial provenance research. I usually start my talks with saying that we are the new kid on the block when it comes to institutions in this field, but I think we can pass on this role now to the Contact Point, because our department and the funding line were inaugurated in January 2019. So looking back, that means we are already almost 2 years old. For those who don't know the foundation, and I would say it's better known in the world of provenance research on Nazi confiscated art. So let me briefly recapitulate what the tasks of the foundation are. It's actually, the tasks are threefold, I'd say. The core activities, of course, funding and counseling, giving advice to counseling potential applicants, that might apply and submit applications to our funding line for post-colonial provenance research. And differently from what you can see here, our funding line, the one that relates to colonialism and colonial contexts, is only can only fund public institutions at this point. The second, and I'll return to the funding conditions and everything a bit later. The second area is documentation of the results that are produced in the projects that we fund. And here you see the website address of Provenance, which is the foundation's own database, which was launched earlier this year. And all research results go into this database sooner or later. Then we are concerned, or we do clarification and networking, and that includes raising public awareness for the importance and significance for post-colonial provenance research. It includes lobbying for provenance research, and we do this by organizing conferences and publications and also workshops. We also do this by teaching, that means dissemination of knowledge. Funding provenance research. I'd just like to specify there's broadly 2 fields or 2 types of provenance research that we can fund. Research that addresses specific objects and collections from colonial contexts in public museums, libraries, and archives. And then as a kind of second type of provenance research, basic and contextual research on how collections came together in the colonial era. In German, that would be Grundlagen- und Kontextforschung. That's broader research on, for example, collectors' networks and so on. And that is typically research that universities and research institutions would be interested in. We've got 2 formats, and I won't go much into detail here. Long-term projects for up to 2 years, and a max funding sum of 300,000 euros, and short-term projects for about 6 months and a max of 15,000 euros. The important thing is that the short-term projects can be applied for very kind of on short notice, so to say, but it need be projects concerning particularly urgent issues like human remains objects that are being claimed back or considered for return. Who can apply? That's publicly funded institutions, legally based in Germany, but they can work with cooperation partners abroad, such as institutions and experts in the countries of origin. That means that German institutions need to be the official applicant, but the money, the funds can also be used by the cooperation partners, and research will also partially be done by cooperation partners. Detailed information on all these framework and conditions you can find on our website. Something on the statistics. So far, we are currently funding 18 long-term projects and 5 short-term projects, and altogether that's a funding sum of 2.6 euros. And if you're interested in specific information on these projects, find them on the project finder. I'd also like to emphasize that we are a very multidisciplinary team. So we have many different expertises in our team. Stefanie Bauer-Mehrwert is an art historian, and she's the main person when it comes to project consulting, to coordination and financial management of projects. Myself, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and one of my focuses is on human remains, but also on restitution and repatriation. Sarah Frund is, and that's very unique, a cultural and a bioanthropologist with a focus on human remains as well. And she's also our specialist for issues of digitalization. And Jan Husken is a historian, and he takes care of the whole field of basic and contextual research here in our department. And I'd like to add here that we also have special regional focuses, and while mine is more in Southern Africa and Australia, where my networks, my scholarly networks are, Sarah Frund's focus is more on Oceania and on the Americas, and Jan Husken's is more on Western Africa and the Caribbean. And this is important because these networks, as we've already emphasized or has been emphasized in the panel this morning, these networks are really crucial for the funding business, for encouraging institutions to apply, for encouraging scholars to get together with institutions and set up projects. But they are also important for engaging in further activities beyond the funding business. And I'd like to mention some of these activities. One of them is our monthly virtual colloquium Provenance Research that we hold in cooperation with the Humboldt University and its Center for Anthropological Research on Museums and Heritage. And of course, you're all invited to the next event, which will take place on Monday, December the 14th. And it'll be a kind of sort of summary of 1 year of post-colonial provenance research at the Museum of Asian Art and Ethnological Museum in Dahlem. Then we'll hold a conference, our 2021 conference at the German Lost Art Foundation will be on early claims for the return of objects from colonial contexts or early returns of objects from colonial contexts. We also do publications. We'll soon issue our 2nd issue of the journal Provenance und Forschung, Provenance and Research this year. I think it'll come out early in December. But we also edit and co-edit and co-write guidelines and manuals and overviews. Currently, we are working on guidelines on interdisciplinary provenance research on human remains and on an overview of Namibian artifacts in German museums and collections. And then another really very crucial activity is building national and international networks. I already mentioned that yesterday we had this round table supported by the German Research Association, which tackled the issue of cooperations in the area of infrastructure and provenance research projects concerning holdings and collections from colonial contexts. And this morning we just issued a little news and message and announcement of the most important results from this roundtable. Concerning networks, I'll end with a chart on the networks that we maintain and that we have kind of solidified so far. I think for our department, for the institution, it's absolutely crucial that we have good relations with collecting, curating, exhibiting institutions. And we have that via museums themselves, museum associations like German Museums Association or ICOM Germany. We also have that with these relations with institutions, heritage institutions in countries of origin, like for example, Namibia. Then a second field is universities and research and teaching institutions. And again, we really strive to have and develop further networks, not only in Germany, but also in Europe, for example, with Dutch institutions, and then of course also in the countries of origin. And then we have strong ties with facilitating institutions, which the German contact point for collections from colonial contexts is one of. And then funding institutions, that's quite obvious. But the last point that I'd like to stress is that we have strong ties as well with independent experts and interest groups like Arbeitskreis Provenance Forschung and Working Group on Colonial Provenances. So I think this has given you maybe a fairly good impression of who we are, what we do, how we support and foster and fund provenance research. And if you've got questions concerning our work, even after the conference, I'd just like to encourage you, drop us an email. We are here to assist you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Förster, very much for this helpful and elucidating overview of the work that you're doing. The floor is open for questions also now. Maybe we can take one or two. I don't see any in the chat yet. Maybe they'll come in the next few seconds. Otherwise, allow me to pose one. You've spoken about the duration of your projects, Dr. Förster, but how long does it actually take for a museum, let's say on average, what's your experience to acquire the funding, to make the request, and then in the end to have a result on the provenance of a particular object? I know it's difficult to come up with average times, but how much in advance does a museum have to plan? How long will the process overall take to find out about the provenance?
I think that's that depends on the resources of the particular museum, and we all know that that's very different. Like big institutions on the Museum Island in Berlin do have resources, but then there's many smaller museums, and our funding line wants to really also address these smaller museums, encourage them to apply. We've got two deadlines for submissions, and that's the 1st of January and the 1st of June. And what we experience is that the most museums would start like half a year before they submit their applications. And then the process that is in place at our institution is that a couple of months after they've submitted their application, they usually get feedback from the funding committee that has decided whether to fund or not their projects. And most projects would apply for provenance research for a period of between 1 and 2 years, and then expect to have worked through the objects that they wanted to tackle in this project. So, but I can't really give a final statement on this, because we are in the process. None of the projects that have been submitted has been concluded yet.
Yes, Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of requests for research. We have two questions in the chat, meanwhile, that I'd like to pose jointly, and then maybe we go to the break. The first one is, how do you make sure that countries and societies of origin are addressed in the projects that the department funds? And the second one is, in what ways can provenance research move beyond the focus on the collector and the legal path to the museum to engage with the places that objects come from, to evaluate the heritage significant to descendant communities?
Yeah,
Dr. Förster, please.
I think the first question is absolutely fundamental. And I tried to indicate in my short presentation that it is of really vital concern for us that every museum that applies at our institution explore in how far they can work together with scholars, with experts, with interest groups, with institutions, with descendants, with heirs from the countries of origin or the societies of origin. So we don't make it a sine qua non condition, because we know that in some cases, the holdings of museums need to really be first sorted out in order to be able to really approach partners in a responsible way. But we really encourage everyone to explore ways of cooperation. And then also you can have a formal cooperation with partners abroad. And that's very much welcomed by our institution as well. And it's very much supported. And we also give advice and we connect people. So we enable making connections between institutions in order to team up for an application as well. And the second one was on the collectors. And this is really one of the biggest problems that we have, because if we want to do provenance research, the path, the methodological path that we go is, in most cases, it's not possible to not go via the collector, because collectors are just better documented than anything else, I would say. But we want to always go beyond that. So we try, if there's any indications of places, sites, local actors that have been involved in the transactions, we encourage institutions to prioritize research around these informations.
All right, thank you. I hope the question was answered properly and doesn't leave anything open. We have received another question that I'd like to pose one more, and that is, Dr. Förster, do you have many artifacts where the provenance is not really clear, and what happens in these cases? Maybe.
Well, I would say,
and then the final word before we go to the lunch break.
Yeah, I think this is a question for the museums. I think it's been discussed already. Many objects do not come with an obvious provenance, and a lot of provenance research is needed. And I'm pretty sure that in some cases we will not be able to find out the specific provenance. And this is also, I think, a good reason why we should think about how to care about cultural heritage even beyond, the fully established provenance. And I think that's also why, in terms of restitution, other criteria have been put forward, like the significance of objects and not only the unethical way of collecting them.
Thank you very much. As said before, we will take up all of the questions that have been and will still be sent, and try to answer them together with also with the speakers. Dr. Förster, I thank you very, very much for your presentation of the important work that you're doing.